Okay, so we're recording now. It's December 30th, 2013. I was wondering if you could tell me a specific story or a specific memory about your father, or of your father.
Well, I think I can. Uh, I should begin, I think, though, with some general information. First of all, I have limited memories of my father because he died when I was 13 years old. Uh, Consequently, I never had an adult conversation with him. It's interesting to speculate what an adult conversation with my father would have been like, since my recollection of him is of not being a very loquacious person in the first place. My general, most vivid recollection of him has to do with the fact that he seemed always to be ill. He was overweight, he had hypertension, high blood pressure, for which there was no treatment at that time. And although I wouldn't call him a complainer, a lot of the things he talked about had to do with his illness. He didn't talk much about his family. He and the other members of the Kaplan family didn't talk much about the past. And as I've said to you before, that made it very difficult for me when I started doing genealogical research on the Kaplan family. And I had to sort of discover it all for myself. And one of the things that I discovered was that most of his cousins in his generation acted in a similar way, because none of my second cousins uh, were able to furnish me much information about their parents' past, only about what their parents' lives had been like during the lives of the children. But I suppose one of the things that I remember most vividly, there are two things I remember very vividly about my father, two experiences. One, it's to me very humorous when I think about it now, because as you know, I've been involved as an avocation for much of my adult life with the area that's generally thought of as family planning, and it has to do with really empowerment of women in what is now referred to in a more common description as women's reproductive health, but really has to do with how people manage their lives and how they educate their children about reproduction and about that sort of thing. You used to shy away from me whenever I wanted to talk to you about the topic that is uh, used to be referred to as the birds and the bees. Um, and I probably went overboard with you and Natalie trying to tell you all about it because I had so little information as a child myself. I remember that my father and I had only one conversation about it. I suppose you'll have to be careful who you show this video to, because the conversation took place as follows, and I can't remember how old I was, but I think I was probably about 11 or 12. And I suspect that my mother had said to my father, "Ike, you got to talk to him." And we were in a car, and I don't know why I remember it, but I know that we were going north on Cooper Street in Memphis. And I don't remember where we were going. But my father said to me, he said, "What do you know about where babies come from?" And I said, "Not much, but I know that it has to do something with a man and a woman." Um, and I probably shied away from having any reference to the word sex or anything like that. It was a different time and people talked in a different way. But I remember him saying, well, he said, I just got two pieces of advice for you. It's amazing that I remember this. He says, first, he said, always use a condom. I didn't know what a condom was. My friends later told me it was what we called a rubber. I don't think any of us knew the word prophylactic at that time. And then he said the other thing was, he said, when you go out on a date, don't ever do it with a Jewish girl. Now, I don't know what that meant, except maybe if you did it with a Jewish girl, you were more likely to get into trouble. I don't know. But it had to do with the mixed up values of the time. That's the only real conversation about anything I ever remember having with my father. I do remember something else, though, that was, in a way, sort of a wondrous event. Because my father had always been sick, I can only remember once pitching a baseball with my father. I remember him occasionally coming to see me play a baseball game or a basketball game. I wasn't involved, except for baseball, I wasn't involved in anything that was organized before he died, because he died when I was 13. But I didn't think of him as being a person who had ever been proficient at games. He was just always this old man who was my father. And there was a gathering at our home on Netherwood. I don't think it was a dinner party, but there were, or maybe it was a dinner party. And some of my mother and father's friends and relatives were there. And afterwards, the women were talking and cleaning the dishes and whatever. And after a while, the men all decided that they would go out, and they took me. I was the only child there. And they were going to go and play pool. I didn't even know that my father knew how to play pool. And they went to what was a fairly nice pool hall for its time on the second floor of the Southern Bowling Lanes, which was on North Cleveland, north of Poplar, not too far away from where Sears Roebuck is, or the Sears building as it is now called, which happened to be owned, by the way, by a relative of our family whose name was Aaron Brenner. Or he owned it with some partners, I think. In any event, they went to this pool hall, and the people I remember being there in our group were my father, Henry Kaplan, who was actually not related to us by blood, but who had married into the family. A man named Ben Goldstein, who was a friend of Henry's and of my father, and Joe Hanover, who was married to my father's sister. And the four of them were shooting pool, and I was just watching. I'm not sure I even knew how to shoot pool at that time. And what became to me immediately apparent to me, even being such a novice as I was that my father was far and away better than these other three men. They were the sort of people you might see shooting pool who only occasionally made a shot and then by accident. And he was running the table and playing position where the cue ball would end up just in the right place after he made the first shot. It's obviously what happens to the cue ball is a lot more important than what happens to the other balls if you want to play good pool. And he was making bank shots and all the other stuff. And I remember how surprised I was that my father could do anything like that. And it only came out later in, I think, a conversation with Uncle Henry or maybe Uncle Joe, I don't remember. And they told me that my father was known as something of an expert among his social group, and that he had acquired the talent while he had had a job as a single man long before he met my mother. And he drove an ambulance, which was also a hearse, for the Collins Funeral Home. I guess he drove a hearse, which was also an ambulance. And I know that he always, when he would talk about that job, he thought that was the best job he'd ever had because it was so exciting to drive that ambulance fast. Apparently, the ambulance drivers and other attendants used to sit around much in the way that firemen sit around at a firehouse now, and they had a pool table at the funeral home. And that's where he'd acquired this talent. And, well, I guess that's the reason it's so memorable, is that it was so unlike anything I knew about my father. Yet here this man was, this big, well, big, not big in the sense of tall like you, Alex. But he was big because he was heavy and out of shape. I mean, people didn't know about being in shape in those days. Everybody smoked, everybody drank, nobody got exercise. And he was so light on his feet. I was told that he actually was a fairly good ballroom dancer as a young man also. I never saw that, but I was told it. And it was like a metamorphosis occurred while I was watching it. This man went from being this sort of dumpy, sickly man to this fellow who was graceful and proficient at doing something. I don't know what that memory means, but that's the memory.